The United States and Mexico border is 1,969 miles long. It is a land that is both beautiful and fragile, with a rich diversity of plants and animals. The management and protection of many of these areas has been entrusted to federal and state agencies. The employees working for these agencies not only have to protect the land and serve the public, but also have to deal with a unique situation, a tremendous amount of drug smuggling and illegal immigration in a harsh desert environment. These illegal activities pose a very real threat to employees. Working along the United States-Mexico border is a 3-module personal safety series for land management employees. Module 1 and 2 are designed to be watched by anyone who works near the border. Module 3 is specifically for firefighters who work in this area. Here's a brief overview of the modules. In Module 1, Understanding the Situation, experienced employees talk about the problems they and their agencies face, from drug smuggling and illegal immigration. It has 3 parts: the nature of the problem, impacts on land management agencies, and impacts on employees. In Module 2, Protecting Yourself, employees discuss what they watch for and what they do to keep safe while working along the border. It has 3 parts: heading out to the field, working in the field, and dealing with the emotional toll. In Module 3, Fighting Fire, firefighters talk about the additional problems they face when conducting prescribed burns or fighting wildfires near the border. It has 2 parts: impacts on firefighters and special precautions when fighting fire. This program contains background imagery from various times and locations. In most cases, the people portrayed in these images are not the actual people or circumstances discussed in the statements. Working on the United States and Mexico border is different than working anywhere else in the country. There are 2 types of illegal activity in this area that you need to be aware of that could affect your work or put you in danger: drug smuggling and illegal immigration. Let's take a look at drug smuggling.
Any place that you go along the border, you'll find a lot of smuggling activity, a lot of cross-border illegal activity. We have cartels that smuggle narcotics into the United States from Mexico in this area, and these people have historically shown themselves to have no concern for human life.
So they're trying to move through as quickly as they can. They move very, very quickly. They often have a couple of people that are carrying food and water for them, and almost all of them have weapons of some kind. They have scouts on the hills above that will be radioing if they see any law enforcement in the area so that they change their route. They do not want to be caught. It's a felony that they're committing, and they often, when they're detected, they'll often run. They hide their drugs and hope to come back to them potentially.
We view the drug smugglers as being more dangerous because they have a lot more at stake monetarily. The drugs they're moving through are very valuable. It's got high commercial value, and if you get in their way, they have a lot to lose. We also know that a lot of them, or a certain percentage of them, are armed, so they're a lot more potentially dangerous than illegal migrants. And then there's also the knowledge that some of them are on drugs at the time that they're moving the drugs, and could be something that makes them extra aggressive and less rational, methamphetamines and who knows what else. So their behavior, you can't predict it to be a rational response to just encountering you out in the backcountry.
Historically, the drug and the human trade has been separate, but right now we're seeing more of a trend for the drug cartels to be controlling the cross-border human trade as well. We've seen instances where they will send a vehicle loaded with humans across, and we'll all drive over and catch it, and then while the agents are occupied with that, they'll send in a load of narcotics in the same area directly afterwards. And Yeah, they're all tied together.
Now let's turn to the other major problem on the border, illegal immigration. It includes the illegal immigrants themselves and the people who smuggle them for money, known as coyotes.
You know, I've been here a long time, and so when I first started here, it was rare to see an immigrant. And when we did, it might have been one person, a single person. These days, it's common to see 20 to 50 to even 70, alongside the road that Border Patrol's apprehended.
Virtually every cross-section that you can think about, everything from young kids basically and moms, all the way through to very elderly people. It's not uncommon to have people in a group that of undocumented immigrants that might be 75 or 80 years old that are coming across. And so you get every cross-section that you can imagine, and this particular area here has got more of what the Border Patrol calls OTMs, other than Mexicans. So they're Guatemalans, and they're from all over the world that come through this particular area.
From what we understand, there's a lot of money involved. Prices that we've heard at this point are anywhere from $1,200 on up, depending upon the type of transportation you're going to get once you get into the United States.
There's a lot at stake, and so people are, they're going to do whatever they have to do to get through, because sometimes they're life savings. Often people actually don't even have the funds when they get here. They become indentured servants to their coyotes until they can make that money, and the coyotes will threaten their families until they get that money.
Well, the coyotes are the people, the smugglers, who lead people through the park, through this area, and lead them north. They're often the ones who arrange for the whole transportation cycle for the people to move into the United States. So it can involve leading them through on foot and also then getting them to a vehicle or a safe house or anything like that. They usually carry weapons of some kind, either guns or knives, and they almost always have cell phones, sometimes radios, and they often, when they're caught, will try to get rid of those things and blend in with the rest of the group and not identify themselves as a coyote. The potential is that they could try to protect themselves or try to get away by injuring somebody who's trying to get in their way, and that potential is very, very high.
Pollero is the guy that guides them to the border. They're the ones that leave them out in the woods, and these people are not from this area. They don't know the country, and they get lost. So all of a sudden they see a road, and they start sticking to the road instead of going up in the mountains. They stick in the road and keep on walking until they get some help. The ones that we meet with, usually they don't have water and they're thirsty, and they're stopping to talk to anybody that's along the road to try to get some water from them to keep on going. But they try to stay on the road so they can get help because they're lost. The pollero usually tells them, "I'll be back in a minute." They disappear, they leave them out there.
These folks are told when they get to the 7-wire international fence that Phoenix or Tucson is just over the hill. And they have no idea that they are in for miles upon miles of rugged walking in an area that's got no water, no potable water. They're just out there on their own, and I don't think they know that.
We've had what we call instances of border banditry, where criminals come across from Mexico, and a lot of them are tied into the smuggling rings. So what's happening is they're robbing the people that they're smuggling across, which would seem to be an example of the snake eating its own tail, but they're not in it for the people, they're in it for the money. And so we've had many instances of armed robberies, especially in this area. We've had numerous instances of groups being told to strip down, strip naked. They've held guns to their heads, they've assaulted the women, and they steal all their money and send them on their way destitute.
Because illegal immigration and drug smuggling is a fact of life on the U.S.-Mexico border, employees take extra precautions before they head to the field to avoid trouble. First, they talk about the importance of getting to know the area.
Any new employee goes through an orientation, And, they've already been appraised of the situation. They will ride along with other staff members in the field. They'll get a feel for the country. They'll even maybe ride along with law enforcement, not in a law enforcement capacity, but to help learn the area. We have an area that is rather difficult to learn. The roads are few. The distances are great. It may take you all day to get across the refuge, for instance. So we're concerned that an employee knows where they are, and if they need help when they radio in, they can adequately articulate to law enforcement how to get to them.
If you're a new employee on a border district, your best bet is to go to that person that's been around for a long time and has seen the changes, the fluctuations, has seen the things that are hard to see, and pick their brain.
Next, employees stress the central role communications play in keeping them safe along the border.
It is. That level of communication is real important because our experience here has been that dangerous situations are going to be things that you encounter suddenly and can kind of spiral out of control very quickly. So it's very important that somebody knows where you are at all times, and that if you do get into any kind of a questionable situation, that you alert somebody to it immediately so that they know that something may be happening in a certain area, and people can be ready to mobilize if they have to.
Things that I'm looking for when I come into a site are, do I have cell phone coverage? What kinds of communication forms do I have before I ever get out of the vehicle? If I know I don't have cell phone coverage, then I need to have something else with me if I'm going to leave that vehicle. I do carry a satellite phone and a handheld radio.
There's normally backup radio systems when employees are out. There's a mobile unit in the vehicle. There's also a handheld unit. And if they're overnighting in more remote areas, there's also a satellite phone with them as well. So there are multiple options for communication.
In many situations, employees emphasize the importance of safety in numbers.
As often as I can, I have someone out there with me, especially if I know I'm going to be in some more remote country or a country I might not be as familiar with. This district has a lot of two-track roads that go out to tanks and stop, and the brush is thick. There's not a lot of turnaround, and when I'm by myself, I generally don't take those because I don't know what's going to be at the end. It might be a drop-off site. Could be anybody out there. Could be trafficking humans, trafficking drugs. So I generally won't take those. But if I'm with a buddy, then they can be watching and, manning a radio or something, and I can still at least get my job done and stay somewhat safe.
Yeah, I don't walk that way.
I may not have come out here. If I didn't have law enforcement, if I didn't have someone else with me, a co-worker, I wouldn't come out. I wouldn't risk it. It's too isolated. If something were to happen to me, it'd be hours before anything would be discovered. And I'm not going to jeopardize myself like that.
Employees also stress the agency's policies on check-in and check-out are particularly important when working near the border.
We monitor our employees. They put in their names, their destination, and the time they're going to be in the field on a checkout board. In certain areas, they check in every half an hour or hour, depending upon the area that they're in. And if there's no check-in, then the monitor will call them by radio and determine that they're okay. And if there's no response, we have an immediate protocol that our law enforcement immediately responds to the area to find them.
Other areas have a little bit less of a risk. They're known areas for layup sites, and in some of those places what we've done is we have a monitoring system where our staff have to check in with the law enforcement officer, tell them where they're going, what vehicle they're in, when they'll be out, that kind of thing, so that our law enforcement officers can check up on them. They don't have to accompany them, but they know, okay, the biologist is in this area, I'm going to keep my eye out and listen, and then they have to check out when they come back out.
We also need it's a policy that when we're out in the field in remote areas, that if I'm going to exit the vehicle, I call in and say, I'm going to be now leaving the vehicle, I plan to be out 30 minutes, and I'm in a certain area. And so they know, and especially if I'm by myself, and then I'll turn around, and I may not have to be even in the border, near the border. I can be, 50 miles, 100 miles, and I'll still do that. Especially if I'm by myself, you have to take those precautions. And then when I get back to the vehicle, I call back in and say I'm back in the vehicle.
Each agency can have different policies on wearing the uniform near the border. You and your supervisor will need to discuss what options you may have, dressing in plain clothes or wearing the uniform. Here are some ways to look at either side of the issue.
There's a controversy over it. My personal feeling on it is that from a safety standpoint, most of the people out in the woods realize that we're Forest Service, that we're not Border Patrol, we're not law enforcement, we're Forest Service. And if they identify us as that, then that reduces the threat level to them. And people tend to be a little less aggressive. They know that we work, unarmed. They know that we're not dealing with all sorts of miscellaneous wrongdoing, that basically we're dealing with the natural resource issues. So my personal feeling is that the uniform contributes to safety because it identifies us, people know what we're doing, and they don't mistake us for law enforcement.
All right, so we'll pound one.
I could check the truck, though. There might be some.
I have the denim shirt that identifies this. I want to be able to identify myself. I'm a Hispanic, and if I didn't have some form of, I feel, ID on me, or my uniform, I could easily be mistaken by the militia and be harassed possibly. There's times when I feel strongly having some form of ID, but like if I'm in more northern areas, the shirt or the jacket may not be that necessary, but I always try to wear my field shirt that has the emblem on it, of some form of ID on it.
Our district ranger here has left it to our discretion. We kind of covered it in job hazard analysis as to whether we use uniforms or not. Some of us prefer not to use uniforms because we don't want to be portrayed as a law enforcement officer. In Mexico, a law enforcement presence could come in any kind of a uniform, so they see a uniform as authority and as law enforcement. And so, we try to stay in plain clothes. And if you do run into somebody, at least in some of our thoughts, are a lot less likely to be aggressive towards you. If they're aggressive towards law enforcement people, if they're doing something wrong, they're going to try to get away. But if they see you just as a citizen or somebody out working out in the field, they aren't going to be near as threatened, I don't believe, from somebody in plain clothes.
Finally, employees stress the need to remain alert and avoid complacency.
Over time, it's real easy for our employees to get complacent because they deal in that kind of environment. They see undocumented immigrants almost every time they come out to the field, and a lot of times nothing happens. And so you get to the point where it's kind of like being in bear country and you're seeing bears all the time. You really don't take any of it real seriously until the first time you get chased up a tree or until the first time you get chewed on. And then it gets a little bit more respect from you. And, of course, those are the kinds of instances that we don't want to have happen. So we're constantly fighting a complacency as well as a lack of knowledge or understanding of what this environment holds for people. Well, I think one of the ways we fight complacency is basically back through training. Periodically, we'll talk about the situations card that we've developed on the border, and we brief off of that. And so I think teaching it is one of the best ways of actually making people more aware and less complacent. So I think we try to attack it from several different points of view, and if we see people being maybe a little bit too liberal, I think we're also in a mode where we would tell somebody that, hey, you probably shouldn't have stopped to help that person, or I was really worried about you in this kind of environment, or you forgot to check out, and so then we had to call you up on the radio and find out where you were at, and I think just express some of that additional concern, because it's real easy to get complacent, but I think a lot of our people are more used to having people complacent around border issues. So we kind of watch out for ourselves too.
Longer term employees often feel the dilemma we have is that they feel very safe here because they've worked here for 15 years, and they feel that the desert hasn't changed that much. There's just a little new influence, and so they often feel that they know how to deal with things, and therefore the safety protocols can get in their way. We keep the conversation always going with the employees about the safety protocol and why we're doing it. Our hope is that through the training that we continue to do and the re-verification of the safety protocol, that people will, if they do get into a situation, they'll think about it and say, oh yeah, I remember I was trained to back out of the situation and to get help immediately, so that they don't continue to think that they're fine.
The damage illegal immigration and drug smuggling has on the land management agencies is significant, but the impacts do not stop there. Employees themselves also feel threatened and get emotionally worn down. First, employees find themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time, surprised by illegal immigrants and drug smugglers.
If they come across people, usually they're either doing some field work and they're either doing some resource monitoring work or some type of work in the backcountry, and they'll either come over a hill and there will be a group of people, anywhere from 1 to 100 people can be the encounter.
We've had so many instances where staff have run across drug smugglers. I've done that personally. I've been out in my vehicle driving down an old dusty road, and there's 6 guys with big black backpacks on. And as soon as they see my truck, they hit the dirt trying to hide. I'd already seen them. I just drove by and called law enforcement.
We were thinning out the pasture, and I saw a guy walking along the fence, so I went to see what was going on, and the guy actually pushed me and hit me on the shoulders. He thought I was going to detain him, took off running. That time I got nervous, though. Because if he went to hit me, just imagine whatever. He could be hiding drugs or a big group of illegals. And we got Border Patrol, and they got the guy, and he had a group of 20 illegals with him, and he was hiding in the canyon.
On horseback, or if you're out on foot doing project work, like an example is we were out doing a project over in Puerto Spring, just north of here. They were doing some welding on a spring exposure, and they were, doing their work, and 120 people walked right through the project where they were welding at.
But an interesting occasion was when I was first assigned the new vehicle that I drive here at work, and it didn't have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service logo on it yet. So I was driving along the Urubaka Road in the riparian section, which is an area they like to the layup sites when they're waiting for prearranged rides, waiting for the next leg of their journey. And I was writing some notes down, caught some movement in the rearview mirror, and I looked back, and here's these 2 guys. They came up out of the ditch, and they were running toward me. They thought I was their pickup. So I took off, and they looked so bewildered.
There was one time when we were just camping and recreating out at Anza-Borrego, and basically, there's a group of us, and I remember in the middle of the night, half asleep, I could hear noises out there, and when I woke up, I saw that I was actually sleeping right next to a trail, an illegal immigrant trail. So it's a little unsettling when you're totally vulnerable and people are just traveling right next to you. Anything could have happened.
Another impact on employees is always having the creepy feeling of being watched.
You know that when you're in the woods these days that you're likely to be watched 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by somebody. And so you never feel like you're alone, and you always get that kind of that feeling in the back of your neck, that somebody's watching. And it's just one of those things that you have to deal with. I think it adds a lot of stress to the employees knowing that, you really can't go out and relax in the forest because you really probably are most of the time under some kind of surveillance.
On the Cabeza Prieta, if you're being watched from a real high point. They're called spotters, and we've detected them and caught them from time to time. And they're capable of being in place for days. They'll be supplied with food, with water. They may have communication equipment to communicate with counterparts in Mexico, and they're watching Border Patrol. They're watching movement. Are you being watched all the time? We don't know. you know. But sometimes we're surprised at what we do find out there. And they do come equipped with night vision goggles with radio contacts, camouflaged up on some of these high points and mountaintops.
The knowledge that we are almost always being watched while in the backcountry is a strange thing. And it's partly the scouts that are operating for the illegal migrants and the smugglers, but also the law enforcement surveillance is out there too. And it's a pretty safe assumption that if you're out in the backcountry anywhere, you're being watched. And it is a weird feeling to have. Knowing that you're being watched all the time, it does make life interesting for simple things. You know, what do you do if you're working out in the backcountry all day long and it's lunch break and you've got to take a potty break? It's a whole different world for people now because you can safely assume you're being watched. So that's kind of the funny angle to it, but the other part of it is to look at that and think about how does that affect my safety here today and my security. And I find that I'm less likely now to actually go and explore something that I might see from a distance. And I'll use that knowledge that I'm being watched to really kind of affect what I'm doing at a much earlier point and start backing off. It kind of fuels your paranoia out here, but having paranoia here is kind of it's a survival skill.
As human traffic moves north into the United States, a lot of waste and debris are discarded along the way, posing a possible biological hazard to employees.
And so anytime our staff is working in the field, they have to be very aware of where they're at, and if they see that they're in a layup site or a site where there has been immigrants in the area with trash, they have to be aware that there's biohazards in those areas that they have to be very, very careful about.
You really don't want to poke around this trash because it's not very safe from a health standpoint. There's human waste here. Sometimes there's drug paraphernalia here, hypodermic syringes, broken glass, things of that nature.
There is concern about human disease. You know, we don't know what kind of disease might be coming across the border. Again, you're not just cleaning up bottles and things. There's human waste in there. We don't have porta potties lined up out throughout the desert, so when they got to go, well, you know, so you don't know what you're going to come across. Yeah, there's a whole lot of different hazards.
Finally, living and working along the border can wear employees down emotionally.
There's a whole aspect of employee wellness, too, on the border. This activity is, even when you're off work, it's still there, still 24 hours. When you want to go hiking in the park, you know it's there. When you want to have some personal time, you know that the activity is going on. There's potential for your car to be broken into, your house to be broken into. So it's a state of vigilance that you have to be in all the time. We have employees transfer. It gets to a situation where they find that they need to move on because of the emotional stress.
For the people who have worked here for quite a while, like myself, and knowing and remembering how it was, it's very discouraging. It's very sad to see what's happening here. You can't even stay on top of it, and it is a daily issue for all of us to be seeing immigrants on the side of the road and mother and child waving you down on the road as you're driving to work, or just the trash cleanup, or the number of trails and the impact to the wildlife. It's very discouraging, and sometimes wonder, you know, what our mission is after a while, because the border issues have taken over.
It's a bit of a dilemma on a human level at times, because if you see someone in pain, you know, especially if I were to run into a child, which there are children crossing the desert, and I saw, you know, someone who was really sick and I knew they needed help then and now, my instinct to want to take care of that person and help them would be so great. And that was hard the day that we had to leave the woman behind whose legs were hurt. It was one of the most awful feelings ever, to feel like here's a woman who's crying and she's crying out in pain and I have to leave her and I can't. I mean, I speak Spanish, but I'm not fluent. I'm basic functional, I can get by. And to not be able to explain to her, we're not leaving you stranded, someone is going to come get you, was just the most painful feeling that I've ever had working out here, to not be able to communicate that to her. And it makes it difficult, you know, on just a personal level.
In this module, you heard about the drug smuggling and illegal immigration that takes place along the U.S.-Mexico border. You also heard how these activities impact land management agencies and their employees. The problems you heard about in this module may seem overwhelming. However, in Module 2, Protecting Yourself, you will hear how experienced employees deal with these issues, maintain their personal safety, and still find meaning in their work despite all of these problems.